Page 52. The Feed Mill Rat Shoot. Moore's Hardware was definitely a gathering place for all the farmers for miles around. However, another popular and ancient building in our little village of Frewsburg, New York, was Struthers Feed Mill. The big structure sat dead center in the middle of town. It was a towering, three-story wooden giant filled with enormous grinding wheels and massive machinery. When in operation, the thundering building seemed to vibrate the ground all around the town. To a country boy, it was the most thrilling and fearsome thing you could imagine. It was wonderful. It was the feed mill, and Grandpa brought us there many times when we were young. Always a busy place during the grinding season, it was the center of activity, with great teams of horses coming and going, tractors pulling huge wagons, dogs barking, and kids running dangerously underfoot. The farmers brought wheat, corn, and grains to be milled into feed for their livestock. During the harvest season, it was the most important building in town, and was the hub that seemed to hold the community together. Nevertheless, times change and needs change. Commercial grains became cheaper, and many farmers began harvesting their own corn for silage, which they could do right on the farm. In the late 1940s, the decision was made to tear the old mill down. Still another reason for its demise was the never-ending rat problem. During the grinding season, the rodents stayed where they were, hidden in burrowed tunnels from the roof of the mill to its very bottom several feet underground. Content on the ample supply of grain, they fattened and multiplied by the thousands. As winter came, the old mill shut down. Then many rats jumped ship and drifted to the houses in town. When there was a definite need for the mill, the townsfolk unhappily put up with the situation. Cat lovers or not, everyone had their brood of protective felines guarding the homestead. Now the need was no longer there. Production had turned to a drizzle, and the old mill had to come down. The dismantling of the building was a sight to see and drew spectators from near and far. The workmen began by removing sheet by sheet the massive tar-papered roof. Soon the great white boards were ripped from the roof and carefully winched to the ground below. Then, story by story, like ants on a hill, the crew worked their way down. Shouting, ripping, and sawing, they dropped the massive beams and fluttering boards as curious townspeople quickly moved out of the way. It was dangerous. It was unique. It would never happen again. Days passed, and the giant building slowly and sadly disappeared, floor by floor. As the men worked, they would see a rat now and then, or someone would shout, "There's one!" However, surprisingly few were seen. Where were the rats? Where had they gone? The smart rats, being the cunning creatures they were, stubbornly held their ground until a moment before a wall was torn down. Then they would quickly flee to the next story, staying just ahead of the demolition. Dozens of dusty tunnels, some not used for years, were their escape route to safety. As work progressed, they all eventually fled down and down and down to the gigantic cellar beneath the ancient building. When the bottom floor was finally torn open, the workmen stood, stunned and speechless. The rolling, moving mass of rodents scrambled in fear as they tried to climb out of the swarming pit. The massive cellar was very deep, with smooth plastered walls, and though a few lucky rats made it to freedom, most were trapped like fish in a bowl. There were hundreds, perhaps thousands, squeaking, climbing, biting, and running in frantic circles in the bottom of the pit. Nearly everyone in town turned out to see this strange, horrific display. Most had seen a rat now and then, but only for a fleeting moment. Here before them was a churning sea of frightened rodents, and something had to be done. An emergency meeting was quickly held at the town hall, and the first suggestion was to burn the cellar to cinders and be done with it. Then another strange solution was offered. And bizarre as it sounds, the town fathers voted 6-0 to have a rat shoot the following night. Of course, There were many irate citizens demanding a more humane way to deal with the problem. But it was 1949, and torchlight madness ruled the day. Within an hour, a huge sign was posted at the mill, and the word spread like wildfire. Feed mill rat shoot, 22 caliber only. Shooting begins at 7 p.m. tonight. The crowd began to gather early that evening, and by 7 o'clock, the huge cellar was soon surrounded by enthusiastic shooters. Although drinking was forbidden, many a man had come fully lubricated as they jostled and shoved each other, some nearly falling into the pit below. Tall, burning burlap torches were donated by the volunteer fire department and were spaced evenly around the crumbling crater. Casting an evil glow on the surging rats below, everyone waited tensely for the carnage to begin. Shadows danced across the grinning faces of spectators as they gathered behind the men. As the moment to open fire approached, the noise grew louder, and the excited men above mirrored the milling rats below. The town constable had the honor of taking the first shot, and the moment he pulled the trigger, every farmer and farmer's son let loose with all they had. It was intense bedlam as the rifles crackled. Men hollered, women screamed, and kids cried. The noise grew to a crescendo as every dog in town raced among the spectators, barking in frenzy. The sharp crack of 100 rifles, fired over and over, was relentless and deafening. The laughter, shouting, and mayhem became fierce and frightening. It was crude. It was brutal. It was immoral. It was the 1940s. Then, finally, it was over. All the vermin were destroyed. An occasional shot was fired, but soon this too came to an end. The volunteer firemen rolled barrels of kerosene to the edge of the pit and began soaking the furry corpses below. Soon they were aflame, and as the blazing fire glistened off the laughing faces in the crowd, it all seemed so unworldly, vicious, and cruel. The rats truly were a danger to the town and had to be destroyed. Yet the pleasure many took in doing this necessary deed was frightening and maniacal. I remember it all too well, and it certainly is not one of my favorite memories. The selection you just heard is from the book 140 Ivory by Travis Cougar Johnson.